Hello and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast, where we're taking all the boxes and bringing a minority perspective to popular internet discourse. I'm Josh. My pronouns are he and him, and I lead the music discussions.
I'm Tilly. My pronouns are she and her, and I lead the film discussions.
And today we are continuing our Joanna Newsom retrospective. We're like bang in the middle of it, discussing disc 2 of Have One on Me. We had recorded this episode before, however, due to technical difficulties, we lost the recording. So we're gonna record it again, and yeah, just discuss kind of the way this disc thematically builds onto disc 1 and how it contrasts with disc 1. And I think it will be a bit interesting this time because we've both heard disc 3 at this point, so we kind of have a better idea of how this fits into like the full complete album, which is incredibly long. I think this is like a really big work.
It is a lot.
Yeah. So if I recall correctly, initially I think we were both a bit less. We both felt that disc 1 was stronger than disc 2.
Yeah, which is a distinction I kind of only make because of the strength of disc 1. I really don't want. I think I said this when we recorded our disc 2 episode. I don't want this to be like a decimal score rating. Let's rank the discs of Have One on Me, which I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but just like it's disc 1 was such a like moment for me in just even becoming an enjoyer of Joanna Newsom's music at all, really, like a properly on board enjoyer rather, that to have disc 2 be a step down, it was something that was definitely worth bringing up just because it's like, I don't know, becomes very relevant to how I feel about the whole album and her as an artist as well.
Yeah.
Especially with such a work like this. You know, it's such a gargantuan thing that you kind of have to like break it down as well.
Yeah, I think that I personally am not viewing it as kind of ranking the disc so much as trying to vocalize kind of the very real experience of listening to the like entire album.
Yeah.
Because I think in like a review format, it's easy to gloss over like the lived feeling of listening to a triple album. And I'm trying to capture how, when you feel like there are like a sort of dwindling kind of inertia as you move from this to this, there is a sort of fatigue that sets in, which I think should be talked about when you discuss triple albums, in the same way that like talking about 4-hour long films. Like if you do feel a certain fatigue hitting at a certain point, that is like part of the lived experience of like going through that piece of art.
I'm so glad you raised that, mainly because you just put it in a way that I was really struggling with in my head to justify to myself, because essentially I just had, this is such a dense gargantuan work with so many ideas in it, just as well as alongside the experience of the album itself, like you were talking about. There is this story and all of this imagery and themes to grapple with this album. And whenever I had doubts over like, I don't know how just like sonically invested I am right now, like like I get that this is a very like personal album and a very just a very deep album, but at the same time I think it's fine to demand justification for a triple album's existence, and that stretches to the like immersion end of things. I'm not saying that storytelling and like almost like literary ideas are separate from your immersion, but it's just something, like you say, that has to be like justified.
Yeah, but that being said, to get to this disc, like even though we felt it was not as impactful as the first disc, I still really love it, and I think I lauded this disc, or I would laud this disc for really thematically doing different things to the first disc. So I think
Yeah.
on this too, what I really got out of this was a greater emphasis on kind of uh the first disc felt very reflective, whereas this feels very driven by narrative. And there's a
Mm,
very clear structure to this disc of beginning with the kind of on a good day, just melancholic kind of reflection on the relationship, very disappointing. And then the run from You and Me Best in California all the way to the conclusion of Occident really feels like the story of struggling to get over a breakup, trying to like physically remove yourself from their space, and then inevitably like coming back to them, and that kind of a cyclical nature of breakups, right? How you tend to have to break up multiple times to fully
yeah.
separate. So I really and in that is the theme of like homes, which I found really pertinent between like In California and Jack Rabbit of home being kind of transformed or irrevocably kind of changed by the end of a relationship.
Mm,
Um, and that kind of fits with this idea of like you need to return to that person because they feel like home and because home isn't the same. Uh, which you kind of is alluded to in the first disc with Easy having that imagery of them sharing a bed together, them sharing a physical space, and that being like a really
yeah.
like euphoric thing, and that breaking down is explored here. So I really like, thematically how this is moving forward and dealing with different stuff as opposed to like the opulence and the
Mm.
uh caretaker role of the woman, which is talked about in disc one quite heavily. Like this does deal with different stuff, so I think that's like really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want it to come across as well that I don't love this disc as well. I still think it's a fantastic bit of music. I
Mm.
think the differences that you noted for me really brought to mind how a lot of the differences between disc 1 and 2 are united by a sense of scale. So like all the self-reflective ideas that I think are being pushed out on disc 1 are just on so much of a smaller scale than the sort of almost American narrative, great American narrative that we kind of talked about was being pushed here. It
Mm.
feels like a very sweeping story, like you say, and I just can't help but feel like there's a wonderful kind of juxtaposition because the sound of this disc, which is one of the reasons why I think it's a little bit less strong, but I think it also simultaneously really works, is that it's a much more scaled down sound. It's a lot less grand with a lot less kind of grandiose moments. But I think that contrast works incredibly well for the like storytelling of it all, actually, to be
Yeah.
honest. I think it really provides like almost confidence to it. And also it feels sad and difficult and hard.
Mm.
It really like implicates you in her position because it's such a difficult narrative. She's struggling so much and just trying to find a corner of herself to call her own. And that's again wonderfully contrasted against this like almost map of where she's finding herself at this time in her life.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, that just makes her seem like this small thing, being dashed against the rocks of life, basically. Like she just doesn't have a say in her own course. Uh,
Mm.
it all just becomes really horribly tragic to me.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
with a kind of, I don't know, a very like manic edge almost. What happens at the end of In California with the breakdown of Cuckoo,
Mm.
where I feel like that is very linked with Disc One's kind of sense of being torn between uh, a countless number of obstacles and
Mm.
just things that demand your attention, essentially, and not being able to keep up and just not quite losing it, but losing your sense of self. So I think, yeah, it's still a very thematically poignant and powerful like section of this album. I just, it's it doesn't it doesn't come short on its own terms. Essentially, it's just that disc one is incredibly impressive on its own terms as well.
I still feel that like the run from You to Be Best all the way through to Jack Rabbits is like an unqualified success for me. Like I think that's a really impeccable run.
Oh yeah,
And I
exactly.
think like what you were saying with the tragedy of this album of Joanna characterizing herself as kind of losing her kind of sense of self-worth and autonomy in the throes of this breakup. I think those themes are like really deepened on disc two. And you were talking about the kind of difference in scope. And I think lyrically I think disc two really harkens back to the songwriting of Ease with the really grand metaphorical drawing on folklore kind of lyricism. But honestly, it works better for me on disc two than it did on a lot of Ease, because I feel like it's much easier to tie the kind of difficult folklore implications and metaphor into the general relatable themes.
Yeah. I
Like
still
what?
find Ease
Yeah,
very alienating in that
yeah.
regard. I really am compelled on a sort of theoretical level by the ideas of that album, but I still just find it very hard to relate to and grapple with. Which is, I mean, I don't think that's a personal failing by any means, and I think, yeah, like you say, the fact that this kind of harkens back to that and achieves it greater is kind of indicative of East, but that's not the album that we're reviewing now.
Well, yeah. I mean, even just like in a song like "You and Me Best," I think it introduces kind of this metaphor for codependence in kind of the zoomorphism of her having a relationship with this person, which is like carrying a horse, caring for a horse, and then gradually characterizing herself as the horse who's being ears cocked up like a gun, yanked by my wrist. And there's this blurring of the lines in the narrative of who is the horse, who is the rider, and who needs who.
Bunny is
And
sorry.
pardon? Oh
No,
yeah.
I said Bunny is a writer. Continue. I'm
There we go.
sorry.
Bunny is a writer. And how at the start of the track it seems that she's caring for this horse, and by the end of the track she's kind of being shook from this sort of delusion and sings it seems I have stolen a horse. And yeah, the idea of like leaving quite a codependent relationship and wondering if we're just not trusting any of your memories, like wondering if the whole thing was fantasy or kind of delusion, and if it was always kind of destined for this breakdown. Like I really like how this builds on the first one and kind of the further kind of exploration of how in memory things like codependence and fantasy kind of tarnish the relationship itself.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, it's very easy to like think you can separate the two because you kind of characterize all the good as coming from the person, that like that is them, these are all these wonderful qualities they have, and it's simply the like act of us joining that arose all of this difficulty, when in actuality it's kind of both. It all that you can't separate all of that in reality. And I think that is a part of why she's so devastated in this section of the album for me. It just seems like there's essentially nothing she can grapple onto. It's really hard to listen to in some regards because of that. It feels like there's very little refuge or safety, emotional safety here, which is an incredible achievement, because I think that's such a cornerstone of what it's like when you go through a breakup such as this, between any kind of in any kind of relationship, romantic or otherwise. Is it's just you lose so much, and I think capturing all of that is really powerful. I mean, In California is kind of magnificent in that regard, because I think that's what, as a song, kind of gives it that narrative scope, alongside You and Me, Bess, as well. But I think those two follow on from disc one so well as like a groundwork, and feel like it just feels like they just feel like they open up the album very grandly, and it's really something special, and it really essential to capturing all that stuff I just talked about with her, like, alienation, essentially.
Would you like to move on to favorite and least favorite tracks so we can talk about In California at length?
Yeah.
And Jackrabbits, which is my favorite track on this disc. Which are kind of two of a piece, I find, I think.
Yeah.
So start with you. Your favorite track is In California, clearly.
It is indeed.
And it is like the epic centerpiece of the album for me. Like, this is the epic center of it.
No, 100%. Which is why it's my favorite song on. It's potentially my favorite song on the entire record, which I'm perfectly fine with saying, and I think that speaks to the achievement of it, essentially. And like, a lot of the time, I'm probably in my more sort of like hipstery tendencies, I'm hesitant to pick one of the songs that is like the song of the album as my favorite. I don't know, it just feels wrong to me, which is definitely hipstery. But In California just takes it. It's such a, I don't know, it's such an offering. It feels like it's such a literary piece to me. Whenever I think of it, I can't help but conjure up like images of like the great American novel. And amongst all of that, though, amongst all of that scale, it's such a personal piece. It's so little. I don't want to characterize the woman as little, but just in terms of very much emotionally, I think that's what she's trying to get across. Like lines such as "Did you love me? Do you spite me? Time will tell if I can be well." It is clearly trying to capture that feeling of coming to a person and requesting, not demanding, but requesting that they define you, not by your own emotions, but by theirs. And I think that is kind of the centerpiece of, not the centerpiece, I think the central theme of this disc. I think it's the being defined by another, and how that leaves you this single, like, in the very literal sense of the word, this very alone, alienated thing with nothing left to grasp onto, essentially. And go on.
I really like that you glom onto that idea of the looking to be defined by someone else. Like, I think that really speaks to like the way this album talks about codependency in a really good way. Of there is a sort of like almost like Hegelian like battle of recognition between the two, like, which kind of links to and this comes back in disc 3 in a really cool way, which links to the zoomorphism of kind of who's the master, who is the pet. Both parties want recognition from the other, but when a relationship feels like unequal or unhealthy, that's impossible to be fully achieved.
Completely.
So I think that's like a really core tension to this album.
Yeah, I'm really glad. This is about to get deep, but I'm really glad you brought up Hegel, because it's very much relationships like this are very much a series of contradictions. It's an insecurity meeting another one's insecurity, and from that comes only, like, the synthesis is just deeper emotional pain, and from that it's a cycle, very much in a dialectic sense. It's actually quite perfect in that regard. I think that really holds up, because it bleeds perfectly then, that section of her like requesting emotional validation into lamenting like that her heart is heavy as an oil drum and she doesn't want to be alone. um and and it is that leads out to um her like cuckoo breakdown.
Yeah, which
I
I
think
want
it
to
mm,
point out the fun Doki Doki Panic fact that everyone who likes this album knows, that the caw, 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 the Grandfather Clock at Midnight sound hits right at the hour mark of this album, uh, which I think
amazing.
which is a really cool fact, I think, and it kind of evokes the idea that this is like a sort of concept album happening in real time. It's like every night at midnight, you know, she like sits in a room and runs this whole album, this whole relationship through her head, you
Yeah.
know, and it's just like, and the kind of impulsiveness of the way she sings that core, the kind of almost involuntary, like this just comes out of her, just like spills out of her. um
Yeah, 100%.
it just really speaks to what you were saying about like losing your autonomy in that, and just like feeling so like taken by the heartbreak, and of what you're saying about this is really just about the dialectic thing. I do like to think of this album as a loop. We'll get to it in this free, but I really think the final track of this free leads perfectly to Easy, and just kind of you can play this album over and over and over, and it will kind of just be just constant like unresolved
No,
mourning for this relationship.
100%. It is morning. The line that has made it such a dark hour, only ever chiming out cuckoo.
Hmm.
Uh, for me, it really emphasizes the dark hour. Just emphasizes that loneliness and the emptiness that comes with realizing you're alone after no longer having that other person to provide emotion for you, to provide like grounding for yourself. It's a very difficult emotion to get across with words, and a very difficult feeling to get to grapple with yourself. And so the breakdown of Cuckoo is so inevitable because you
Yeah,
try
it's
and
that.
stir something up within yourself.
Yeah,
You try and grapple with anything, and it just leads you down into a spiral. And all you can do is grip onto whatever your brain comes out with. And I just think Cuckoo like gets that across
and it goes
so
back to
beautifully.
that zoomorphism, like becoming like a rooster at the crack of dawn. You know,
Yeah,
sometimes I'm so in love with you, like a little clock that trembles at the edge of the hour, only ever calling out cuckoo. Like it. Yeah, she's this active imagery of like her not becoming a autonomous person, and just like doting animal that like clockwork will kind of spill out
yeah,
love compulsively. It's just she's such a tremendously wonderful writer, and like I think no matter what problems anyone may have of this disc, or this album rather, call it self-indulgent, call it masturbatory, I think it's undeniable just the sheer prowess of her writing.
yeah,
Recently, Donda came out by Kanye West, which is like a 90-minute long album. Uh, and I think contrasting, and we did a Kanye retrospective, so contrasting that with Joanna's process, like we have these two artists who are like very self-indulgent,
yeah.
but I do think with Joanna it is more earned. I feel like my time isn't being as wasted, and if I actually sit down with it and read through it, I actually do get more out of it than I do on an initial listen. But I think
This,
sometimes with
yeah,
Donda, and we'll get to it, we're going to talk about Donda
of course we
in a
are.
few weeks.
Yeah,
It just there's so many like diminishing returns, and you just do feel like there's not the writing to back up this kind of self-indulgency at all points. So I really do commend Have One of Me for just like when you actually sit down with it, you really do reap the rewards, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is what I was trying to sort of get across at the beginning when I spoke about earning, like you were talking about yourself, earning the length and that kind of thing. Where I do also feel like, yeah, if I sat down and dug into the depth of this album, into the like lyricism and storytelling, it would kind of be worth it. It's just about what you're getting from it and where you're coming at it from, and that can differ. That can you can be the same person and come at the album differently at different times. I just think, yeah, there's different ways to get through to this album, and so you have to at least appreciate certain things about it.
Yeah, I think to transition from your favorite track in California to my favorite track, Jackrabbits, I find Jackrabbits for me is one of the most heartbreaking and vulnerable moments on the album. Where, you know, in the narrative that this two is building, if in California, sort of just really empowering kind of stamp away from your partner, like, I'm gonna move to California. Do not cross the boundary of my heart. Do not, do not stay away. It's like, you know, that wonderful kind of, I can do this on my own. And then Jackrabbits is the awful kind of, everyone's been through it, the crawling back, you know, and it's such a tender inspiration that underlays the track. It's very like ponderous and wondering in a really warm and good way. And it feels like being like drunk or hungover or tired and just like giving up and wanting to be held by a familiar love in spite of it all. It's just a really like, I find it a really vulnerable and tender moment on this project. Really down to earth, really earthy, as we talked about on Disc One.
Yeah, very earthly.
I love the vocal flutter she sings of the telling you I am, telling you I can love you again. Like there's a feeling of, in that hope and inherent joy of seeing the person, there's a sort of like stumbling in the words, the awkward phrasing of that line, not knowing how to say it. That really really hits on something really true and sad, you know. Really sad. I find it really sad.
Yeah, it's just very sad. All of this, I feel very you feel very compelled to her perspective in this section. I don't know, it's heartbreaking, all of it.
And we see some of this in Disc 3 again in the song Esme, which we'll get to, but this sort of like attempt to find the beauty of love despite living in the failure of it, right? Like the part where she's trying to convince him that love can have no bounds and have no end and change in shape or form but never change in size. It's such a beautiful like summation of love over time. And it's really hard to hold on to that hope or optimism in the midst of a breakup. And that's what makes this like a really lovely love song so desperately heartbreaking in the middle of an album like this.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Do you want to do your least favorite track first? Or?
Yeah, my least favorite track is Go Long. What was yours?
Mine is actually Occident, purely because just over the those falling harp sections like really get me with I don't know. I think there's a lot of great stuff going on in Occident, which but I don't know. There's something very chilling about those falling harp sections that I don't know. They make me very weak at the knees. I think they're just absolutely gorgeous.
So you like it, but it's your least favorite? Is that what you're saying about Occident?
Oh, sorry. Occident, Occident would be my least favorite. Go Long, I got wrapped up in defending Go Long's harp sections. Sorry. No, that was very unclear. You're right. I'm gonna repeat that. So yeah, I Occident is my least favorite. I think there's some really great stuff going on, but it was between Go Long and Occident for me, and Go Long won out purely because of those like falling harp sections that I just think are really beautiful. And Occident just doesn't do as much for me purely musically.
You know, looking back, you're kind of winning me over. Like I might prefer Go Long to Occident. I think also because lyrically, I think there's more going on in Go Long.
Yeah, I just think those sections are stunning. I think they're absolutely stunning. And it's such a it's not overblown in any way. They feel very incidental to the song. Which gives them like a sort of an ironical grandeur. It just feels very unaffected, and I think it's gorgeous.
And also, we talked about this album utilizing the kind of mythical imagery of ease. that approach to lyric writing. And I really love how she uses the metaphor of Bluebeard, and that story follows that the murderous husband who showers the wife in luxury, and then she realizes that he is a murderer, and he's like, hey, there's this one door that you can't open, and she's like, well, I'm going to open that door. Dead bodies of women. And the great line, I was brought in on a palanquin made of the many bodies of beautiful women, which kind of like evokes kind of the emotional baggage brought into relationships, as well as kind of the stuff in the first disc of her feeling like she is one of the opulent items that is in his possession, like kind of feeling used up, like we talked about how she views herself as like a bottle being drained kind of for the joy and pleasure of others or him. So lyrically, really good. Occident, maybe you're right. Maybe Occident is my least favorite track. I really do. I like the final line of Occident. I love the kind of ending of her inviting him home and to stay with me, stay here with me line. That's a really great cliffhanger for this too. But yeah, you're right. There's less going on, and I do like the woeful descriptions of the American geography, but also that epic of this is like this, United States kind of trekking, sprawling album. But yeah, it probably is my least favorite.
Occident is it's for me. It's very purely an incidental least favorite song. Like I think it's a good song. It's just literally my least favorite from this section. So yeah, that's my pick.
I think that covers it. That's a disc 2 of Have One on Me. I'm at like a decent recommend. I think this is really good, and there's so much good stuff happening here. It does start to like wane a bit instrumentally compared to disc 1, but I don't think it suffers too much from that.
Yeah, honestly, there's nothing more for me to add to that. It's a decent recommend from me. But yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said, and I have nothing more to add. So yeah, that covers it for disc 2.
Sweet. So what are we doing next week on the film side of the podcast?
Our next film episode is going to be the beginning of our trilogy for the year. We're doing Robert Rodriguez's Mariachi trilogy, and we're beginning, therefore, with El Mariachi. So that's next week's film episode.
Sweet. I look forward. I've been trying to watch some Rodriguez films.
He is a crazy director.
It's really weird cinematography. It's like bifurcated into 3 parts, which is like his like
kid films,
Mexican language films.
Oh yeah.
His children films and his Tarantino films. And there's like there's the only 3 Rodriguez films. It's very strange.
And the Mexican language ones are the only ones that appeal to me. So that's what we're doing. Okay. So yeah.
Anyway, cool. So we'll catch you next week with that.
Thanks very much for listening.
See ya.
Boom.